and we are ready to get started. We start with a first keynote, and I have an honor to present him, namely Etzel Carden. Carden, who is the Thurs Professor of Psychology at Lund University, Sweden, where he is Director of the Center for Research on Consciousness and Anomalous Psychology. He's a native of Mexico, whose academic studies led him to the US and finally to the University of California, Davis, where he accomplished his doctoral thesis under the supervision of Charles Hart on the phenomenology of deep states of hypnosis. After that, he continued his postdoctoral work in the area of dissociation and hypnosis at Stanford University. Carden has held several academic posts in the American universities and different American universities. He has served as president of several academic associations, like the Society of Psychological Hypnosis, which is one of the subdivisions of APA, the Society for Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis, and the Parapsychological Association, which honored Carden with the 2013 Charles Honorton Integrative Contributions Award. Carden has written hundreds of publications on his topic area. He is the editor of the two voluminous and important academic anthologies, Varieties of Anomalous Experience, examining the scientific evidence, published in 2000 and republished in 2014, and Altering Consciousness in two volumes, published in 2011, which discusses the importance of altered states across history, culture, and in many disciplines, including arts. Both works highly recommendable and indispensable reading for all who are interested in these topics. In addition to his professional work in psychology, Carden is the artistic director of the International Theatre of Malmö and has worked in theatre as a director, actor, and playwright in Mexico, the US, and Sweden. Given the topic of the seminar and on the basis of this information, nobody wonders why he is here now, today. I just want to express my gratitude that you accepted that invitation, and I wish you warmly welcome.
Itos Cesar, Itos Lena, Itos Siri, och Rita, and all of the other people who have been so graciously in their invitation and all of our interactions. As you were saying that people should not wonder why I'm here, I hope that they will still not wonder after they have heard me. So we'll look about that. Before I start, I have a PowerPoint with a few audiovisual additions, but something that Lena said can be a good introduction to what I'm going to be talking about, because she was saying, well, if you have been working in performance and you have been very strenuously exerting your body and your mind, you may have had some altered states, you may have experienced some altered states, and that's exactly what happened to me, and that's exactly why I'm here, and that's exactly why I ended up also going the way I did in my psychology work. I was working in Mexico with Nicolás Núñez and then later with Grotowski, and doing very demanding bodily work to the point where I said I cannot go anymore, and then I was forced to go further, and then really interesting things started happening. And so I realized, well, I am doing a degree in psychology, and in my degree nobody's talking about this. There is no information whatsoever other than people in the University of California. So those experiences that I had in performance ended up also informing the main area of my work in psychology, and I hope vice versa. So as a preamble, I wanted to also say that in my presentation, which it stands for Monkey Mind, there it is. Usually what our mind does a lot of the time. I will start with a state of consciousness that without question has scientifically been shown to distort reality, namely the waking ordinary state. And I will show you a number of ways in which our waking ordinary state distorts reality, and why we start with what we might call the monkey mind, and how we can go from that to an embodied performance presence. And probably all of you know the gentleman there, Richard Cheslak, in his iconic performance as the Content Prince in Grotowski's production. And the other person, some of you may know as well, is Philip Zarelli, who has been doing a lot of practical work, writing some very good books on the presence of the performer, based on both Eastern and Western traditions. And I will come back to Phil, because I think also he's a good example that you do not need to be completely neurotic, as Richard Cheslak was, and to have a mess of a life, to have a full embodied presence. Sometimes it pays to have psychopathology, but it also has a very high price, and you do not need to have it. So let's start with, if you will, the map of the terrain. And I will start talking about mind wandering. That's what the monkey mind is about in the Eastern tradition. So I will talk about mind wandering and other lapses that we do even when we are trying to meditate or to pay attention to anything. I will talk a bit about why do we lapse so much. And there are some good reasons. However, they tend to be automatic, out of control, and of course we know that one of the things that as a performer you want to do is to de-automatize what happens automatically. And don't worry about writing too much. I can make the presentation available through ESA or whichever way you want, so that you don't have to worry about writing as much. So I will tell you a number of ways in which we can explain why we lapse so much, and then as a counterpoint to this, and a number of you of course are very aware, is that there are a number of techniques to try to bring about greater continuity in conscious experience. And they go all the way from focusing of attention through hypnosis or meditation, to becoming aware and reducing automaticity, to the good old three: sex, drugs and rock and roll, or sex, drugs and performance, and psychophysical integration, reverberating circuits between performer and audience, and so on. So that is our plan, sort of starting from why are we unable to pay attention more than a few seconds. And don't worry, if you suddenly don't remember what I just said, that's perfectly normal. I end up repeating in my classes to students, I say the same thing a number of times, and I tell them, it's not because I think you're stupid, it is not because I do not have anything else to say, it is because at any one point I know that about a third of you I think know something else. So I'll have to come back to it. So let's start with somebody who's very good at monkey mind, and that is Simpson. And there he is, his wife is telling him something, and instead he is thinking about something else, something that of course happens to all of us. So when we talk about mind wandering and other lapses, and we have done research on this in CERCAP at Lund, the way that typically in the field mind wandering is defined is mentation, that is what is going on through your mind, mentation unrelated to your ongoing activity and independently of stimuli. I mean, if there is a sudden big sound, everyone will pay attention to it. That's not mind wandering. We have to do that. But when you are trying to pay attention to your improvisation just before going and presenting it in your class, instead of being fully connected to the stimuli that are going through your body, you may suddenly start thinking about what are people going to be thinking about, am I doing it well, oh, last time I did it, it didn't go so well. So mind wandering is also related to other concepts. One is daydreaming, and I will come back to daydreaming. Daydreaming is not necessarily bad. It can be the source of creativity. God knows, here's a person who is leading meditation, but I meditate every so often, and God knows that I get a lot of good ideas when I meditate. It's not what I am supposed to be doing, but suddenly, yes, I hadn't thought about that. So it can be good, but it also can include wild or unbeaten fantasies and memories, especially of things that didn't go well, of things that are unresolved in our lives. And if there is time later on, perhaps in discussion or at some other point, I can give you some examples of my research, even when I find people that suddenly go into something else because of that daydreaming that they could not control. Attentional lapses. You start paying attention and suddenly you don't. And having a blank and unresponsive mind. You know, sometimes people assume when you are mind wandering, it is because you are in the beach, you are thinking about your past, you are thinking about the future, but sometimes people are just not thinking about anything. And yeah, I have a number of students like that. And also one of my areas is dissociation. And we know that people sometimes, because of ongoing or past traumatic events, suddenly seem unable to connect to what is happening, and it is not necessarily that they're thinking about something else. It just seems that there is no processing. It's not pure consciousness. It's just like being stuck in no person's land. So what are some of the characteristics of mind wandering? And by the way, as I'm going through, I'm giving you a lot of information, and it may be in a language that is not your first language, so please, if you want me to clarify anything, just let me know, and I will clarify, not in Finnish, but I will be glad to say it in a different way in English. So please let me know. So first thing, some characteristics of mind wandering from research. More than one thing at a time in different surveys. More than half of the people, or more than half of the time, people are saying, well, I was paying attention to Etzel, but I was also thinking about lunch. I was paying attention to him, but I was also thinking about what I was going to present next. About 20% of the time is not directed. It is not necessarily that you are thinking about the better way to express something, but you suddenly thought about the lunch you want to have. And this is the one that I like to emphasize. Because if you tell me that about 1/5 of your thoughts is about weird, distorted, unrealistic things, I will tell you, welcome to the club. Because that's what most people end up having once you start actually scanning their experience at random times. So about 1/5, and of course there's a variation, some people do it more, some people do it less. But more or less, if you're on average, about 1/5 of your thoughts is that you have become the president or prime minister, I don't know what you have, of Finland, or you have done something to some president in some other land, or whatever. You're thinking about all the things that are not very realistic about 1/5 of the time. That's where those figures come from, Eric Klinger's research. So, now that I have been telling you, yes, we do lapse. A lot of the times we're thinking about other things than the ones we are supposed to be focused on. One obvious question is, why do we lapse so much? Why do humans lapse so much? And this is a diagram that I got from Bernard Bars, a famous psychologist of consciousness. And there is what we have at any one time, conscious experience. Of course, this is a diagram. Because actually, if he and we were going to be realistic, we probably should say that the conscious experience is like a pinpoint. It's like one point here, and then pre-conscious information would cover the rest of the screen. That is, at any one point, there's a lot more mental processing events occurring than the ones we are conscious of, which is rather small. As a performer, you want to enhance it. As an artist, you want to enhance it, but it is quite small. So what is vying to get into your conscious attention? And here is what Bernie Bars proposes, which, by the way, is based on William James. If you want to read a great psychologist, go back more than 100 years. William James had about the best thoughts of almost anything in this area. And there are many things that are vying for your attention. The senses, of course. They are very important when one is awake, particularly visual senses, which can overrule auditory senses. Then there are your inner senses, your visual imagery. If I said something about going in the beach and daydreaming about the beach. Probably that may have brought some memories to one of you about the last time you were in a very nice holiday in the beach. And then you have a number of ideas, intuitions. Oh, what Etzel said suddenly reminds me or makes me think of. Or other associations that may not necessarily be logical. So at any one point, we're having all of those events. And all of this is being processed by what? Many different mental information. So just as I'm talking to you, for instance, the way that my language is being processed is something that I'm not at all conscious of. I'm glad that it seems that I have been able to come up with coherent sentences, but I am not really figuring out how grammatically I should be talking. If I start trying to do that as I'm trying to do it now consciously, suddenly I become a lot slower. Because most of the time that is happening very automatically. So one of the things is that we have many competing sources of stimulation, and what we attend to depends on many events that are vying for our attention. The itch that we have on the left butt, what I'm saying, what your neighbor did or just moved, those are some of the events. And now let me focus on associations. I say something, said something about the beat, I said something about performance, something about being in an altered state, and maybe you suddenly had an association. Why? Because our mind seems to work pretty much as a semantic network. A network of related ideas and concepts which depend on your past experience. So let's say that I mentioned school, that I went to school in Mexico or drama school, and then that, for some of you, may be associated to being a student, to a boss. If you took a bus to go to the school, maybe your boss was yellow. The yellow is associated to bananas, bananas to coconuts, coconuts to an island, and so on and so forth. And very rapidly, school becomes a plum in your association. And that's not rare. That's something that you can easily see in stream of association literature and in your own ideas if you just follow them carefully. They typically, even when something seems to be very unrelated, there is some kind of associating network that can explain it. So if you are following me, let me give you two examples. The first one is a sad one of a person with schizophrenia. The next one will be a wonderful artistic one from James Joyce's Molly Bloom's monologue at the end of Ulysses. So, bless you. So, this person, it's close to February, I feel claustrophobia, I am the nun. If that is not enough, you're still his. That is a brave cavalier, take him as your husband, Caroline. You well know, though you are my lord, you were just a dream. If you're the dove god, and so on. And you may think either this is postmodern poetry, or prose poetry, and it seems to be just a lot of nonsense, but actually it is not. If you try to analyze it, and I do not know who this person is, I just found this example, and if you start analyzing it, actually it is fairly easy to see how one phrase comes from the previous one. So for whatever reason, the person, well actually, it's close to February, cold month. If you are in one of our countries, northern countries, you don't go out as much, so it is natural that you may stay inside and that you may feel a bit claustrophobic. If you stay in a claustrum, enclosed, you can be like a nun. And if you are like a nun, well, you're still his. Whose? God's. And that is a brave cavalier, take him as your husband, as nuns do to God. And so on and so forth. So you could just go and see that essentially when you find in the discourse of the person who seems to make no sense, that suddenly there will be moments in which the language breaks. And it breaks because there was in a semantic network some association. And this is an extreme example, but we all do this. And in James Joyce's extraordinary linguistic performance, here is the Molly Bloom monologue. Ah, yes, I know them well, who was the first person in the universe before there was anybody that made it all. Who? They don't know, neither do I, so there you are. They might as well try to stop the sun from rising tomorrow. The sun shines for you, he said. And then she goes on to remember the first time that he had intimacy with Leopold Bloom. And you can, if you in a sense break her very long monologue in Ulysses, you can see very clearly how she's moving from one point to the other, to the other. And this is something that we could actually, and we can do with our own thoughts. There is a kind of method in research psychology called thinking out loud, where you just ask a person, start talking everything that goes through your mind. And you end up having things like this, not as beautifully crafted as James Joyce did, but a number of things where you are having shifts in the concepts. So that is something that happens to us. And so it is difficult to remain in the events that are happening in quote-unquote reality, because all of the time you're having these networks that are pulling you in different ways to different places. And once you're in a different place, then you will be pulled to a different place and so on. Okay? Are you with me? Any questions so far? No? Okay, so let me then go now to, as I've been saying, this is one of the ways or one of the reasons why we laugh so much. Because we are all of the time having associations. Another very important reason is that we have, and we tend to be, once we start developing language, a year and a half, 2 years, we start giving greater primacy to conceptual associations over persons. So when I was telling to you the normal waking state is one in which we distort reality, I was not exaggerating. One of the reasons is that we end up superimposing on what is presumably out there the concepts and ideas that we have. So I'm going to show you, I hope that it will work well, something from the net. Oops, not yet. There. Oh, come on. It's from a cognitive psychologist, and I would like you to look. You are going to be shown a number of cards. And look at them. They are shown rapidly at first, and then a bit more slowly. And try to remember what are the cards you are being shown. So here. So remember what you saw. Okay, that is enough. Anybody remembers having seen a 6 of hearts? No, good. Some of you did. Great. Oh, sorry. And it is very interesting that some of you remember, because actually you remember something you did not see. Because if you were to play this again, you would see that there is not a 6 of hearts, there is a 6 of spades. But because red is typically associated with hearts, in your previous experience with playing cards, you have seen red in hearts. What people do in experiments, and I'm sure if we were to test it more carefully, it wouldn't be only 3 or 4 of you, it would be more who would remember that people end up superimposing their preconceptions of having seen a 6 of hearts, even though there was no 6 of hearts, but a 6 of spades. So what we expect we oftentimes superimpose. And we do this, of course, not only with playing cards, but with all types of things. If we end up interacting with someone that we already think is a really nasty person, whatever he or she says, even if it were just a lapse that he or she did not pay full attention, we will probably interpret it in a way that we thought, oh yes, of course, he is disrespecting me yet again, or she is disrespecting me yet again. And so instead of perceiving something, we end up superimposing our concepts, our associations, our expectations of what is going to occur. Clear? So why do we do this? Come on. Yeah, it's not working. Let me see why not. Thank you. I'm using the arrows. Okay. Thank you so much. So why do we do that? Well, here's Freddy the Frog, who is going to help us explain that. Because there was a very interesting study a few decades ago that showed that frogs' eyes are responsive to things that are ecologically important to them, such as what? Small moving objects and sudden darkening, change of light. What do these correspond to? Small rapid objects, that's lunch. Suddenly a change in luminosity, that is one hawk or one bird coming above them, about to have them for lunch. So those are the kinds of features. There were a couple of other ones, but they also were related to what was ecologically important to the frog. And we have to think that as humans, we essentially share the same kind of evolutionary limitations. We have ended up being selecting certain kinds of features that earlier on were very important for our survival and nowadays may not be as important. Such as what? For humans, sudden big changes in the perceptual field. So when you were not safe in this theater, but you were in the savannas, if you suddenly saw something large moving around, that might have been a predator or a prey. On the other hand, it is not good for things that do not change or for very gradual changes. So there are no predators that are going to come to hunt you that are going to move very slowly. They're not. You know, a little chameleon it's not going to do anything to you. So we are not good for that. We are, just to put it in more, if you will, contemporary terms, we're very good at paying attention to something large that change, hurricanes. We're not good at all to feeling the same kind of emergency when there is the gradual change in weather in the world. We prioritize visual stimuli. And we know, for example, we do not have time to see it, but there is the Mcgurk Effect, which shows that if you're hearing something and you're seeing a person saying something else, what you're going to hear is what the person is saying, not what you're actually hearing. So if what you're hearing is va, and the person is saying va, saying it without sounds. It's just the sounds of the mouth are va, but you're hearing fa, and somebody asks you, what did you hear? Va. What the movement of the mouth was like, not what your ears actually heard. So we prioritize visual stimuli and we match patterns. We tend to be conservative and we tend to be conceptual, as I showed you in the experiment of Jerome Bruner just a few moments ago. So there are some things that we prioritize, some that we do not. Another thing why we lapse is that we just become exhausted. Unless you end up training for becoming better at that. Here is from some study in which people ended up looking at what is called reaction time. So you're put in front of a screen and you're supposed to press when there is the sudden, a sudden stimulus that appears. The people who are in red ended up sleeping normally. The people in yellow had 3 hours on average less of sleep. And essentially what this diagram tells you is that if you haven't slept as much, if you come from Brazil or some place where you have just arrived here recently, you're going to make many more mistakes. Even if it is something very important, and you are in a visual vigilance task where your concern is to know whether there are missiles coming to Finland, well, better get some nicely rested meditators to do that instead of other people, because you're going to make that kind of mistakes. So how do we know these kinds of things? For example, one way to do it, and I sort of mentioned it, this is just 5 seconds, is in our lab and in many other labs we use what is called experiential sampling method, where we may give you a kind of intelligent phone, and you wear it with you, and at random times it beeps, and then after it beeped, it asks you, just before the beep, what were you thinking about? What were you experiencing? Were you happy, and so on? And by doing that, for instance, in one of our studies, we can say that, yes, boredom also makes a difference. Being exhausted is not good to keep track of what is happening. Being bored, so many of you are already tracking out on something else, for instance, it may be the same thing. So this is a test called SART, and essentially it is a boring test. You are shown numbers, and you're supposed to click when the number 3 shows up. But the number 3 appears very rarely. So you're seeing 1, 2, 4, 4, 2, 1, so on. And when, essentially what this graph is telling you is when there is boredom and you do not need to be paying much attention, the activity demand, the kind of mistakes, the mind wandering, that is what it is. Experiential sampling. When you start mind wandering, not thinking about the task that you're doing, you start doing it more on what is called sort of more boredom type of stimulation. So if you're going to have people on track with you, you have to give them something challenging, and that is changing. Which brings us to another thing, which is related to boredom, and that is repetition and habituation. Okay? First, let me show you that is a slide, and this is not with a human. It shows presynaptic decreases in the motor neuron of a snail. And what happens is that at the beginning, this is when an event was happening just at the very start. And you see that the snail is reacting both sensorially, and there's a motor reaction. When it is being touched, it reacts. You keep on doing the same thing. After 20 minutes, the snail is like, not doing much. When after 50 minutes, it's barely there. And even though I could not find a good parallel with humans, this happens with humans as well. That sound of the exhaust, until I told you about it, you have forgotten. Because why? It doesn't change. It remains the same. So if somebody were to ask you, well, was there any sound other than Etzel speaking? You might have said, no, not really. There was nothing else. Why? Because it remained the same. You were consciously aware of it, or you were conscious of it when you entered, because there was a change. It remained the same. You forgot about it. So we're going to do now a little experiment. It's unfortunately not something to have you move, but feel free to move if you want to, just to stretch while you are listening to it. And what I would like you to do is to please pay close attention to what you're going to listen. And after about a minute, I will ask you how many different words you heard. You can do this with eyes open or with eyes closed. You can stand up, stretch, do whatever you want. Let me get to it. Okay. Who heard more than 10 different words? Anybody? Between 5 and 10. There's a couple of people. Between 2 and 5. More people. Okay, good. Who heard only one? Okay. You were already on the trick to an extent. But a number of you, those who did not hear, those who heard more than one word, were not in contact with reality. And that's actually when I do this in a class that does not have meditators or people maybe trained in performance disciplines. The people who hear many different words, and if you play it for longer than just about a minute and a half, the people who hear a number of words is more than half. And the stimulus has not changed. But what has changed alongside with what I was telling you about is that you have what is called sensory fatigue, receptor fatigue. Our system is not geared to things that remain the same. So after a while, this is called the verbal transformation effect, VTE. So after a while, people start hearing, some of those who heard between 2 and 5, what other words did you hear? Does anybody mind mentioning it?
I heard cut and agitate.
Sorry?
Cut
Got
and agitate.
and agitate. Got and agitate. Thank you. Anybody here? Yes.
Gravity and quantity.
Gravity and quantity. We have a physicist here. We have a hard science person here. One last one. Anybody else heard something else? How about the people who heard only one? What did you hear? Cogitate, which means think. Says.
I heard cogitate. And then when I saw the word, then I knew, okay, it's supposed to be cogitate.
So yes, and maybe I should have gotten rid of that. But yes, you have got your tape, something like that. You start transforming. And that is normal. That is a normal waking state. We're supposed to be in touch with reality. Well, we are not. So one of the reasons why we also end up having lapses, so all of these are examples of lapses, is that stimuli do not change. So if my delivery of this talk has been very monotonous, I think by now most of you have heard something else and are in your own daydream world. You're not listening to me. So that is another reason. Things do not change. They are repetitive, you become habituated. And the next one, I will have a cartoon help me explain it. And it was found by a Russian psychologist of about 100 years ago, Zyganik. And it has to do with that big bugaboo of all of us, unresolved issues. So here we have, I do not know, some hero from the Kalevala. Well, I don't know which heroes you have, but he finds a chest who is locked, and no, he or she does not have time to look around for the keys, doesn't care what is inside anymore, then goes, fights with the dragon, rescues somebody else, and after he or she has slain the dragon and has his or her beloved, what is he or she thinking about? The trunk, because that was not solved. Because that remains an issue there. And the second effect just shows that we tend to remember better things that were not solved. That's what it is about. And if you will, there is a very simple level and then there is a much stronger level. The simpler level is that in your class you could have a number of exercises, or meditation, or sensory deprivation, or whatever, and if you leave the last one, you say, well, I'll tell you, this is what we were going to do, but we have to leave. So let's go, we'll do it next time. You can check that your students are going to remember more the one that you did not than the one that you did. So if you want them to remember, do that. That's at the lower level. At the higher level, it refers to more personal, profound issues. So that people who have not solved previous relationships, attachment issues with caretakers and so on, they end up having more problems with mind wandering. So in one of the studies that we did with mind wandering, we found that people who had not solved their attachment, that is, their sense of being secure with their caretakers early in life, they tended to mind wander more as adults. So not even as children, as adults, they were somehow having an effect, and they tended to mind wander more when they were thinking about their parents than when they were thinking about good friends. In a much more, if you will, clinical level, I was doing an experiment with somebody not so long ago. It had to do with Gansfeld, and suddenly this person has an image that she is drowning, and she starts feeling very bad, so we stopped the experiment. I talked to her, and the issue is that she had been close to drown when she was a 4-year-old. Now she was an adult. So 40 years later, when she was just not thinking, presumably, about anything, just going into an altered state, there was an issue that was still haunting her, because I think in some way she had still not solved that panic that she had earlier on, which of course can affect if you're going to be a performer and you want to be in the present moment. If you are going to have associations to issues that you haven't resolved in your life, they're going to come back. And even though you may end up getting the Oscar, the Academy Award, you're still thinking about why they did not give it to you earlier on, or whatever. Happens to all of us. Let me skip that. So, I have given you a number of different ways on which we mind wander, in which we lapse, in which we are unable to remain in touch with, presumably, is a representation of reality. That's the most we can say. It's not reality, but a representation. So, what can we do to try to reduce mind wandering? And I'm going to try to give you examples from both psychology and from performance. First one, here is a hypnotist, sort of looks like an old school hypnotist that is using a clock, a pocket watch. You actually do not need to use that. But what originally this one was good for is to have a person focus on something, and the watch was good because it is swinging, which means it is changing. It doesn't just remain static. So it helps you to focus while at the same time having some kind of event. And what we know happens in hypnosis, which is an area that I work on, is that people tend to reduce what is called metacognition, sort of their associations, their critical thoughts, their concepts about things. They tend to remain more focused on what the hypnotist is saying. Not everyone does it, but the people who respond to hypnosis about, well, let's say the majority of people do respond to an extent to hypnosis, the 80% or so, tend not to be thinking so much about events, so they are less conceptual. And so they can get more into the kind of experiences that you're giving to them. So you can do that using hypnosis, but I would not recommend and I cannot emphasize this strongly, that you do not do this with your actor performers before they go to perform. Because we have examples in film. I can think of one, but there's more than one. Heart of something, Heart of Red. There's a Werner Herzog film where what he did was hypnotize his actors to go and do his work so that they would feel that they were back in the Germany of the 19th or 18th century, so on. It's not boring to see them. I do like Herzog film in general, but that is not one of his best. Because essentially what you see is that the performers are talking like this all the time. I am not watching you. There is Gabriele. He is there. It's monotonous. So I do not recommend that you hypnotize your people so that they do a performance. You can help them doing similar things so that they realize different ways of being, different states of consciousness, but not that they will be in a performance doing that. Because in a performance, you want somebody who is actively connecting, interacting, changing, processing what is occurring. On the other hand, as an audience, I think one person who did very successfully a kind of induction for the audience was Vincent Kemp. Did anybody here saw his Flowers, his show on Jean Anouilh? Anybody? Too bad. And even if there are a few excerpts here and there, you cannot really get the impact of it. I saw it in Mexico when he came many years ago, and there was a scream in front of the performers that made everything look a bit dreamlike. So it wasn't strong colors or images, it was all diffuse, and the lighting was also sort of diffuse. So at least my experience was that I was in a dream, and the lights in the auditorium were very dark. So I think what he very successfully did was to get the audience to be in something like a fantasy world, a dreamlike world, and we were, or at least I was completely into it until it ended. So one thing that you can do is try to focus attention, try to reduce metacognition, sort of the associations. And we know that there are things that help to reduce automaticity. So here's one example from research psychology. I have to explain it a bit. But there is something called the IAT, Implicit Association Test. And in the IAT, what occurs is that you are shown, let's say, photographs of people who differ in some feature. Let's assume strength. Now let's assume in gender. And then you are being asked, well, to rate two synonyms. Well, some synonyms or some words have to do with strength. And as soon as you see a word that has to do with strength, you have to press a button as rapidly as you can. And the question is, when you see a photograph of a male, will you press the button more rapidly than when you see associated to the word a photograph of a woman? Okay, so again, the issue is whether you tend to implicitly associate. Even though you may say, I have no biases, I have no prejudices whatsoever, I am the most liberal, not utilitarian, but equalitarian person in the world. What we find using this kind of test is that all of us do make discriminations, even though we may think that we do not. And so, for example, and I would imagine in some countries more than others, you will find that people on average will tend to press more rapidly words that have to do with strength when they have associated images of male. Or you can do it with gender, or you can do it with whatever. But what this slide shows is that when you end up having people who have been trained in meditation after a while, these are controlled, this is the control group, people who were not trained into meditation, and this is the people who have been trained into meditation. And the higher the bar, the more you have that implicit bias. It had to do, in one test it was with race, and the other one it was with age. So would you associate being weak, feeble, useless with people who are older than with younger? And as you can see, the people who have been practicing mindfulness meditation, they still show the bias, but they show a significantly lower bias. So one thing that can help reduce a number of different ways in which we tend to lapse is to engage in some type of mindfulness, concentrated discipline that helps to de-automatize, that helps to make the kind of automatic choices that we did be a bit less automatic. Is this clear? Any questions?
Yes, I would
Yes.
like to ask, is this automaticity here means that you actually, you make the kind of automatic choices that you referred to regarding gender?
Correct. That you make the association.
What are these assumptions then? I would like to understand what are these assumptions, what are we supposed to think? What were the pre-assumptions in this particular research?
Yeah, in all of this, and that's a good question because some people have challenged this question because they say, what the assumption? But one of the assumptions is that when you press faster, that means that you tend to associate an attribute with whatever photo you saw. So, because they are congruent. So one of the assumptions is males, strong. Women, not as strong, so there is something that is incongruous. And so I will delay a bit. And the delays are very small. These are statistically significant, but actually the delays are very small. So one of the assumptions that is questionable is to what extent does this sort of somewhat faster way of clicking into, let's say, something favoring males with strength, does this translate into actual bias in everyday behavior? And there is still an ongoing contention in psychology whether this is the case or not. Some studies have found that yes, there is some relation, some others not. There does not seem to be a very strong relation, but some relation. So in general, if you were to find people who tended to delay a lot, they are more likely to express more biases, let's say, about women not being as strong.
Just asking whether this has been done with some other content. So is it a question of, but is it a question of content or is it a question of ways of reacting?
It's ways of reacting.
It means mindfulness creates, or meditation creates delay in reaction.
Correct.
So
No, it's not delay in reaction. No, because this is relative to how much is men strong, women strong. So it is not the mindful meditators are being slower. It is that mindful meditators are not making as much a discrimination between men and women.
Right.
So that's how it is. But you can check it. There are a couple of web pages where you can actually do those tests yourself. And you cannot directly translate this into, yes, you ended up taking longer, that means that you must be a neo-Nazi. No, those are really big steps, except with some politicians. But I think there is some connection, and it is not just a delay. That is taken into consideration. So these are more within, in between groups. Okay, thanks. Yes, please.
I wonder about the word strength, though, because if I can pose another question, like let's use the word love or care,
Yeah.
it would be a much more sort of a fuzzy word. With strength, you might be thinking of physical strength, but you can also have other kinds of strengths. So to me, also the question, the way that the question is put in, that the word strength is being used, is also creating a certain kind of force.
Yeah, and that was just because I was using this as an example, as a simple example. But this research has been done with many different types of adjectives, so that they would take into consideration. So, for instance, one that I can think of would be words related to danger or crime, and then you have people who are dark-skinned, people who are more white or pink-skinned, we should say, more pink-skinned. And then you look at the, they're
Pinkish hue.
Pinkish hue, pinkish brown. And so you find out whether there is a difference in how rapidly. But this has been done with dozens, if not hundreds, of different matches between attributes of people and adjectives. So the example I just gave was one that I thought would be too simple. But yeah, others do take into consideration other issues. Thanks. Yes. Okay, so you can try to reduce automaticity, and you can have intense and challenging stimulation as you are training actors or as you're doing it yourself. And first let me show you something from psychology and then the Cirque du Soleil. First, this is from a study on mind wandering that was done a number of years ago, a few years ago, and this was about the extent of how much people mind wandered while they were doing some activities. So here it is, essentially the issue is the percent. So the further you are up here, it means the less you are mind wandering. Further this way, you are mind wandering more. So there, when you are working, here in TIC, say I come here, I put my 8 hours on the work. Well, probably if this is about 60% of the time, that means that about 40% of the time of those 8 hours, you were actually doing what you were supposed to be doing, and the rest you were probably thinking about something else. The same as people everywhere else. But what I wanted to draw your attention is to this little thing. And this is just sort of euphemistically called making love. So the only activity in which people were definitely mind-wandering less was in having sex. You're in an altered state. An orgasm is an altered state. You really have different senses of time, space, and so on. And that was about the only time that people were not mind-wandering a lot. And another I would submit to you is if you are doing very strong performance physical work, such as these people in Cirque du Soleil, if you start mind-wandering while you are here, you're not going to live long. You are certainly not going to be a part of the truth, because you're just going to fall and make other people fall. So if you are in an activity, and that is one of the reasons why some people like ultimate kind of sports, is that it forces you to be completely there, present at that point, because if you are not, you may end up dying, literally. So those kinds of events are very important, and I will come back to that in just a few minutes, because the kind of theatrical activity that I most enjoyed did involve something that was extremely challenging and dangerous, that has to do with the risky kind of theme for the conference. So you can try to have intense, challenging stimulation in your workshops. And here is Philip Cirilli, conducting a workshop some years after that photograph. And he has an excellent study or chapter in the book we co-edited, which, as I mentioned, that I would recommend if you're at all interested in the topic that you get it. And what he does is review the role of altering states of consciousness in performance traditions in both the East and the West. And as far as I know, it's the only type of publication that I've seen where someone has sought to integrate such rich traditions within the scope of how do they try to affect your state of consciousness, including, of course, going from monkey mind to some kind of psychophysical integration. So towards the end of his essay, he writes, subsuming the self into the whole in a successful is what a number of these traditions are seeking. This is what I was doing with Nicolás Núñez or Stephen Brombelow or Grotowski's work. And in a successful performance, we reach an alternative state of non-dual awareness consciousness. So, of course, we could just develop a whole presentation on that. What does he mean? What do we mean by non-dual consciousness? But for our purposes, just for today's lecture, we can say a non-dual consciousness is one in which the monkeys are just resting, are not jumping into different things, are not jumping into, well, I feel a bit wrong, am I doing this well, in which you are not having all of those conceptual edits and comments about your activity, and you are just your activity. You are just what you are doing. And we have had a number of artists, do you want to go? Let me just finish this. And I have a number of phrases of performers and dancers, for example, who, and It might have happened to a number of you here, who, when probably you do theater performance not to be seen, but for those precious moments when you are just what you're doing, and there is not even a you there. There is just the activity happening either when you're alone or with somebody else, and you're just pure non-dual consciousness. And of course, this is not, if you wait to happen spontaneously and do not do anything to try to developing, that may never happen to you. And even if you try to train, it will happen, not every time by any means, but it will happen more often. Yes?
Maybe know about 9 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and I think we will even have time to do something. Thank you. So, one of the ways to do that is by integrating psychophysically what you do, because there is quite a bit of difference. Part of the reason why you are mind wandering back and forth is because we tend to express ourselves as just being somewhere inside the cranium there. And you disregard the rest of what is happening in your body. But of course, one of the things that you may want to do is to have an integration so that the contents of your consciousness are fully taken by awareness of all of your body and your breathing that is there and so on that is occurring. And that is enough. There is a lot of information so that all of the other competitors for that stream of consciousness have a much stronger victor, or they cannot compete as well because you are integrated into a lot of information coming from all of your mind and body, traveling as a unison. And you can do that individually, or you can do that, of course, with your audience. And I will just play a few seconds. Some of you may know, I think Bobby McFerrin is the master of trying to do reverberating circuits in which you also seek to have the contents of your consciousness being taken over by what is happening, by the changes again of what is occurring as you're interacting with the audience. So, for those of you who do not know him, do get to see him in some YouTube clips where... sorry about that, I could not get rid of it.
It's this black orbital mind.
Yes. Well, that's Monkey Man. You want to see Monkey Man? There he was.
Yeah.
And he can do that for half an hour. And you have the greatest time. I was an audience in one of his shows. You have the greatest time, and it is always a very live spectacle. So of course, not all spectacles, in all spectacles can you do that. But you can try to do something like that with your other co-authors, which brings me to my pretty much next to last. Well, two more. Yes, I have 5 minutes. That you can do that with the other people whom you are working with as performance artists. So this is a film from something that my previous teacher, collaborator, Nicolás Núñez in Mexico is doing. He calls it Teatro de Alto Riesgo, High Risk Theater. And what he has been doing for decades is that if you are in his group, there are no audience and actors, everybody's part of it, and you are challenged all the time in many different ways. Physically, you are challenged. As I mentioned, some of the things, the reason why I got into the psychology I got was because I had altered states while working with him. Suddenly I saw that my body could be much more agile, that I was completely non-dual in what I was doing, that I was not feeling cold in a place where I should have been freezing, that I could feel no pain. I said, wow! And there were no drugs involved. What is this about? And it came through that, through having a number of activities where you are, in a sense, taken to the edge and perhaps a bit more. So what are some implications for performance training, for performance itself? Try to engage in appealing, dynamic, challenging activities. This is coming from going against the monkey mind. Avoid repetitions and routines. You have a particular reason to do them. Solve issues that make you ruminate. Remember the Mcgurk Effect. Both simple ones and more profound ones in your personality. Try to solve them. Reduce automaticity and stress perceptions. Feel the contents of your consciousness with psychophysical non-dual awareness in interaction with others, if you're working with others. Explore enhanced, altered states of consciousness. And finally, this is my next to last, mind wandering is not necessarily negative. It may produce novel associations as long as you control it, as you welcome it when it is time for it to be there, rather than it controlling you. So you do not want to be mind wandering in performance when you're supposed to be doing something else in the world of Chekhov or whomever. So let me finish in what probably a number of you have been experiencing during this talk. So there you are in your spaceship. You can sort of go through that quickly, and you're thinking, I'm going into a world beyond human comprehension, into a world where time has no meaning. And then you are in your seats thinking, man oh man, this lecture lasts forever. So, eat us for your attention. We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
That's right.
Okay.
1, 2 short questions, please.
Yes. Yes.
I was thinking when you were lecturing about multitasking as a form of being present in a context, and multitasking goes against this.
Yes, I think it does if what you're doing in performance or in life is trying to be completely present in what you are doing. Because by doing multitasking, you are in a sense using some part of your attention into one kind of activity, some other percentage into other activities, so you did not become fully immersed into what you should be. Now, there are some conditions, of course, where we know mothers or fathers who are taking care of children, young children, probably have to multitask. They have no choice. They may have to be doing a number of things simultaneously. But other than that, we know from Zen practice in eating or something, if you take the time to just be in the morsel that you're eating, it tastes very differently than when you are just eating and checking your iPhone. Is this?
But I would argue, but not for now, that acting is a multitask activity.
Well, within the parameters of what you're supposed to be doing as an actor, correct? Because if what you're saying, as an actor, let's say I am in Chekhov, I am supposed to be paying attention to my entrance, to what the other person is doing. All of those are different types of quests, but they are all focused, or they are driven by my being a character, Trofimovich or whomever, in this particular circumstance. So if that is what you have in mind, I would say all of those multiple activities are still focused on one general event, as compared with, for example, being in the scene and thinking about whether you parked in the correct place or not, which may make you miss the cue of the other actor. So I would agree with you if you're saying, yes, as an actor you have to be paying attention to many things, but all have, in a sense, they have the same goal. Is that along the lines of what you had?
Yeah.
In mind? Okay, yeah, then we are in full
But
agreement.
I'm not sure they always have the same goal.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Okay, very, very interesting, and it does intertwine with the things that I've been thinking. My twofold question. First one, are we talking about the experience of a performer or the audience? So I think about the awareness or the mindfulness or the enhanced consciousness of the performer. How does that transmit to the audience? So I'm sort of more interested in the spectator, how we create this kind of experience for the spectators. And that's the first question. The second question is, have you thought about immersive theatre in these terms?
About immersive
theatre. Immersive theatre.
Yes, yes.
Have you
Yeah, let me take the second one first. Absolutely, because I think in immersive theater we go very much along the lines of you are loading onto conscious awareness a lot of things that are related to what you want people to experience. So they have less chance of being thinking about something else. The first one was about the audience. Well, I would think that it depends on what you want the audience to experience. I have been mostly, not exclusively, but mostly focusing on the performance. But when I talk about Vincent Kemp's Flowers, I was saying that what they did was to try to, I think, have the people be in a sort of dream-like experience. So it depends on what you want people to do. If you want them to be critical a la Brecht, then you come up with some idea where you do not have them become as absorbed as they might ordinarily be. Do you want them to be fully absorbed, then you may get into more immersive theater. It depends on what goal you want for the audience. But even for the audience, all of the things that I talked to you about, I think are relevant. If you do not want to lose the audience, you should not be repetitive, unchanging, blah, 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 all of that list. The fewer you have of them, the more likely it is that the audience is going to be with you. Just to give one last example, in the Piccolo Teatro de Villano, which is in Mexico, I remember one time when they're doing an event on a play that was not that memorable, but suddenly there's a chance that a person starts taking out toys, and suddenly an actor jumps out from a very small, so obviously there was a trap there. But that was completely unexpected. It was a big change. It didn't go at all with my concepts, and it certainly woke me up. And it made me pay even more attention.
Just to have to oppose a little about immersive theatre, isn't that a way of making people really mind wander? It's a sort of an example of how we become wanderers in a sense. So in that sense, I think immersive theatre is not what you're saying.
Well, then maybe it is not what. Just 2 seconds. What do you mean then by immersive theatre? Because I was thinking one in which you as an audience are in.
You are inside
the
a performance structure that
yes.
Where you become immersed, and that basically that is a wandering place. You are a wanderer within a structure.
Okay, I was thinking about immersive theatre where I was an active audience, Teatro de los Sentidos, for instance, would you go through different costumes, different events, and so you have to be actively doing things, you have to make choices. And so I was very present. I'm done.
Okay, we thank you.